Chapter 22 St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries. Harry was so relieved that she was taking him seriously that he did not hesitate but jumped out of bed at once, pulled on his dressing gown, and pushed his glasses back onto his nose. Wesley, you have to come too, said Professor McGonagall. They followed Professor McGonagall past the silent figures of Neville, Dean, and Seamus, out of the dormitory, down the spiral staircase into the common room, through the portrait hole, and off along the fat lady's moonlight corridor. Harry felt as though the panic inside him might spill over at the moment. He wanted to run to yell for Dumbledore. Mr. Weasley was bleeding as they walked along so steadily, and what if those fangs? Harry tried hard not to think. My fangs had seemed poisonous. They passed Mrs. Norris, who turned her lamp-like eyes upon them and hissed faintly, but Professor McGonagall said, "Shh." Miss Norris slunk away into the shadow, and in few minutes they had reached the stone gargoyle guarding the entrance to Dumbledore's office. "Whizzing Whizby," said Professor McGonagall. The gargoyle sprang to life and leaped aside. The wall behind it split in two to reveal the stone staircase that was moving continuously upward like a spiral escalator. The three of them stepped into the moving stair. The wall closed behind them with a thud, and they were moving upward in tight circles until they reached the highly polished oak door with the brass cooker shaped like a griffin. Though it was now well past midnight, there were noises coming from inside the room. Positive babble of them. It sounded as though Dumbledore was entertaining at least a dozen people. Professor McGonagall rapped 3 times with the griffin knocker, and the voice ceased abruptly as though someone had switched them all off. The door opened of its own accord, and Professor McGonagall led Harry and Ron inside. The room was in half darkness. The strange silver instruments standing on the table were silent and still rather than whirring and emptying puff of smoke as they usually did. The portrait of old headmaster and headmistress covering the wall were all Susie. In their frames behind the door, a magnificent red and gold bird, the size of swan doors, and it perched with the head off under its wings. "Oh, it's you, Professor McGonagall." And, Dumbledore was sitting in a high-backed chair behind his desk. He leaned forward into the pool of candlelight illuminating the paper laid out before him. He was wearing a magnificent embroidered purple and golden dressing gown over a snowy white nightshirt, but seemed wide awake, his penetrating light blue eyes fixed intently upon Professor McGonagall. "Professor Dumbledore, Potter had a nightmare," said Professor Dumbledore. "He says it wasn't a nightmare," said Harry quickly. Professor McGonagall looked around at Harry, probing slightly. "Very well, then, Potter, you tell the headmaster about it." Well, I was asleep," said Harry, and even in the terror and his desperation to make Dumbledore understand, he felt slightly irritated that the headmaster was not looking at him but examining his own interlocked finger. But it wasn't an ordinary dream. It was real. I saw it happen. He took a deep breath. "Ron's dad, Mr. Weasley, has been attacked by a giant snake." The word seemed to reverberating in the air after he had said them, slightly ridiculous, even comic. There was a pause in which Dumbledore leaned back and stared meditatively at the ceiling. Ron looked from Harry to Dumbledore, white-faced and shocked. "How did you see this?" Dumbledore asked quickly, still not looking at Harry. "Well, I don't know," said Harry, rather angrily. "What did it matter inside my head, I suppose?" "You misunderstanding me," said Dumbledore, still in the same calm tone. "I mean, can you remember where you were positioning as you watched this attack happen? Were you perhaps standing beside the victim, or else looking down on the scene from above?" Which was such a curious question that Harry gaped at Dumbledore. It was almost as though he knew. "I was a snake," he said. "I saw it all from the snake's point of view." Nobody else spoke for a moment. Then Dumbledore, now looking at Ron, who was still wry-faced, said in a new and sharp voice, "Is Arthur seriously injured?" "Yes," said Harry empathetically. "Why were they all so sure on the uptake? Did they not realize how much a person bleed when Fang and Long pierce their side? And why could Dumbledore not do him a courtesy of looking at him?" But Dumbledore stood up so quickly that Harry jumped and addressed one of the wall portraits hanging very near the ceiling. "Everard," he said sharply, "and you too, Dilsey, a shallow-faced wizard with short black bang and elder witch with a long silver ringlet in the frame beside him, both of whom seemed to have been in the deepest of sleep, opened their eye immediately." "You are listening," said Dumbledore. The wizard nodded, in which said naturally. "The man has red hair and glasses," said Dumbledore. "Edward, you will need to raise the alarm. Make sure he is found by the right people." Both nodded and moved slightly out of the frames, but instead of emerging in neighboring pictures as usually happened at Hogwarts, neither reappeared. The frame now contained nothing but a backdrop of dark curtain. Rather a handsome leather armchair. Harry noticed that many of the other headmaster and headmistress on the wall thought snoring and drooling most convincingly kept sneaking peek at him. "Better there," I yelled, and he suddenly understood who had been talking when they had knocked. Everard and Dilsley were two of Hogwarts' most celebrated heads, Dumbledore said, now sweeping around Harry, Ron, and Mrs. Professor McGonagall, and approaching the magnificent sleeping bird in the pitch beside the door. "They are renowned in says that both have portraits hanging in other important wizarding institutions. As they are free to move between their own portrait, they can tell us what may be happening elsewhere." "But Mr. Weasley will be anywhere," said Harry. "Please sit down, all three of you," said Dumbledore, as though Harry had not spoken. "Edward and Weasley may not be back for several minutes. Professor McGonagall, if you could draw up extra chair." Professor McGonagall pulled her wand from the pocket of her dressing gown and waved it. Three chairs appeared out of thin air, straight-backed and wooden, quick, unlike the comfortable chintz armchair that Dumbledore had conjured back at Harry's hearing. Harry sat down, watching Dumbledore over his shoulder. Dumbledore was now stroking Fawkes' plump golden head with one finger. The phoenix awoke immediately. He stretched his beautiful head high and observed Dumbledore through bright dark eyes. "We will need," said Dumbledore very quickly to the bird, "a warning." There was a flash of fire, and a phoenix had gone. Dumbledore now swooped down upon one of the fragile silver instruments, whose function Harry had never known, carried it over to his desk, sat down facing them again, and tapped it gently with the tip of his wand. The instrument tickle into life at once with rhythmic clicking noise. Tiny puff of pale green smoke issued from the silver tube at the top of Dumbledore's watch. The smoke closely his brow furrowed, and after a few seconds, a tiny puff became a steady stream of smoke that thickened and coiled in the air. A serpent's head grew out of the end of it, opening his mouth wide. Harry wondered whether the instrument was conferring his story. He looked eagerly at Dumbledore for a sign that he was right, but Dumbledore did not look up. Naturally, murmured Dumbledore, apparently to himself, still observing the stream of smoke without the slightest sign of surprise. But, in essence, divided. Harry could make neither head nor tail of the question. The smoke serpent, however, split itself instantly into two snakes, both coiling and undulating in the dark air. With a look of grim satisfaction, Dumbledore gave the instrument another gentle tap with his wand. The clicking noise slowed and died, and the smoke serpent grew faint, became a formless haze, and vanished. Dumbledore replaced the instrument upon its spindle little table. Harry saw many of the old headmaster in the portrait follow him with their eyes, then realizing that Harry was watching them hastily pretend to be sleeping again. Harry wanted to ask what the strange silver instrument was for, but before he could do so, there was a shout from the top of the wall to their right. The wizard called Evard had reappeared in portrait, bending slightly. Dumbledore, what news? Said Dumbledore at once. I yelled until someone came running, said the wizard, who was mopping his brow on curtain behind him. Said, I had heard something moving downstairs. They weren't sure whether to feed, but they found it. So there was no portrait down there to watch from. He doesn't look good. He's covered in blood. I ran along to Alfred Graf's portrait to get a good view as they left. Good, said Dumbledore as Ron made a convulsive movement. I take it. We'll have see him arrived. Then, a moment later, the silver ringlet, which had reappeared in her picture too, she sank coughing into her armchair and said, Yes, they have taken him to St. Mungo's Dumbledore. They carried him past under my portrait. He looked bad. Thank you, said Dumbledore. He looked around at Professor McGonagall. Minerva, I need you to go and awake the other Weasley children, of course. Professor McGonagall got up and moved swiftly to the door. Harry cast a sideway glance at Ron, who was now looking terrified, and Dumbledore. What about Molly? Said Professor McGonagall, pausing at the door. That will be a job of Fox when he had finished keeping a lookout for anybody approaching, said Dumbledore. She was already known. That excellent claw of hers. Harry knew Dumbledore was referring to the clock that told not the time but the whereabouts and condition of the various Weasley family member, and which a pang he thought that Mr. Weasley had must even now be pointing at mortal Pearl. It was very late. Mrs. Weasley was probably asleep or watching the clock, and he felt cold as he remembered Mrs. Weasley's bogart turning into Mr. Weasley's lifeless body. His glasses, oaken, blood running down his face, but Mr. Weasley wasn't going to die. He couldn't. Dumbledore was now rummaging in cupboard behind Harry and Ron. He emerged from it carrying a blackened old kettle, which he placed carefully upon his desk. He raised his wand and muttered, Porters. For a moment, the kettle trembled, glowing with an odd blue light. Then it wavered to the rest as solidly back as ever. Dumbledore marched over to another portrait, this time of clever looking wizard with a pointed beard who had been painted wearing the Slytherin color of green and silver and was apparently sleeping too deeply that he could not hear Dumbledore's voice when he attempted to rouse him. Phineas, Phineas, and now the subject of the portrait living in the room were no longer pretending to be asleep. They were shifting around in their frames, the better to watch what was happening. When the clever looking wizard continued to fight sleep, some of them shouted his name too. Phineas, Phineas, Phineas. He could not pretend any longer. He gave a theatrical jerk and opened his wide. Did someone called? I need you to visit your other portrait again, Phineas, said Dumbledore. I have got another message. Visit my other portrait, said Phineas in a ready voice, giving a long fake yawn, his eyes traveling around the room and focusing upon Harry. Oh no, Dumbledore, I'm too tired tonight. Something about Phineas' voice was familiar to Harry. Where had he heard it before? But before he could think, the portrait on the surrounding walls broke into a storm of protest. Insubordination, sir, roared a corpulent, red-nosed wizard, brandishing his fist. Dereliction of duty. We are honor bound to give service to present headmaster of Hogwarts, cried a frail-looking old wizard whom Harry recognized as Dumbledore's predecessor, Armando Dippet. Shame on you, Phineas. Shall I pursue him, Dumbledore? Called a gemmed-eyed witch, raising an unusual thick wand that looked not unlike a witch's rod. Oh, very well, said the wizard called Phineas, eyeing the wand slightly apprehensively. Though he may well have destroyed my picture by now, he's done most of the family. Harris knows not to destroy your portrait, said Dumbledore, and Harry realized immediately where he had heard Phineas' voice before, issuing from the apparently empty frame in his bedroom in Grimmauld Place. You are to give his message that Arthur Weasley had been gravely injured and that his wife, children, and Harry Potter will be arriving at his house shortly. Do you understand? Arthur Weasley, injured wife and children, and Harry Potter coming to stay. Replied Phineas in a bored voice. Yes, yes, very well. He slipped away into the frame of the portrait and disappeared from view at the very moment that the study door opened again. Fred, George, and Ginny were ushered inside by Professor McGonagall, all three of them looking disheveled and shocked, still in their night things. Harry, what's going on? Asked Ginny, who looked frightened. Professor McGonagall said, You saw Dad hurt. Your father has been injured in the course of his work for the Order of Phoenix, said Dumbledore before Harry could speak. He has been taken to St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries, sending you back to Cyrus' house, which is much more convenient for the hospital than the burrow. You will meet your mother there. How are you going? Asked Fred, looking shaken. Flu powder? No, said Dumbledore. Flu powder is not safe at the moment. Network is being watched. You will be taking a portkey. He indicated the old kettle lying innocently on his desk. We are just waiting for Phineas Nicholas to report back. I wish to be sure that the coast is clear before sending you. There was a flash of flame in the very middle of the office, leaving behind a single golden feather that floated gently to the floor. These folks warning, said Dumbledore, watching the feather as it fell. She must know you are out of your bed. Minerva, Go and head off. Tell her any story. Professor McGonagall was gone in a swish of tartan. He say he'll be delighted, said a bold voice behind Dumbledore. The wizard called Phineas had reappeared in front of the Slytherin's banner. My great grandson had always had odd taste in house guests. Come here then, Dumbledore said to Harry and Weasley, and quickly, before anyone else joined us, Harry and Arthur gathered around Dumbledore's desk. You have all used a portkey before? Asked Dumbledore, and nodded, each reaching out of touch some part of the blackness kettle. Good. On the count of three, then one, two. It happened in a fraction of a second, in an infamous pause before Dumbledore said three. Harry looked up at him. They were very close together, and Dumbledore's clear blue gaze moved from the portcullis to Harry's face. At once, Harry's card burned white hot, as though the old wound had burst open again, and unbinding unwanted but terrified tongue there rose within Harry a hatred so powerful he felt for that instant that he would not like nothing better than a strike to beat, to sink his fang into the man before him. 3. He felt a powerful jerk behind his navel. The ground vanished before beneath his feet. His hand was glued, and the kettle he was banging into the other as all sped forward in a swirl of colors and a rush of wind, the kettle pulling them onward, and then his feet hit the ground so hard that his knees buckled. The kettle clattered to the ground, and somewhere close at hand a voice said, "Back again." The blood trickled. Brat, it is it true? Their father's dying out, roared a second voice. Harry screamed to his feet and looked around. They had arrived in a gloomy basement kitchen of number 12 Grimmauld Place. The only source of light were the fire and one guttering candle, with illuminating the remains of solitary supper. Gretcher was disappearing through the door to the hall, looking back at them malevolently as they hitched up his loincloth. Cyrus was hurrying toward them, all looking anxious. He was unshaven and still in his day clothes. There was also slightly Murdoch's-like wave of still drink about him. "What's going on?" he said, stretching out a hand of help. "Guinea up." "Phineas Nicholas," said. "Arthur's been badly injured." "Ask Harry," said Fred. "Yeah, I want to hear this for myself," said George. The twin and Guinea were staring at him. Creature's footsteps had stopped on the stair outside. "It was," Harry began. "This had even worse than telling McGonagall and Dumbledore. I had a kind of vision." And he told them all that he had seen, though he already altered the story so that it sounded as though he had watched from the sideline as the snake attacked, rather than from behind the snake's own eyes. Ron, who was still very wide, gave him fleeting look, but did not speak. When Harry had finished, Fred and George and Ginny continued to stare at him for a moment. Harry did not know whether he was imagining it or not, but he faced it, and was something accusatory in their look. Well, if they were going to blame him for just seeing the attack, he was glad he had not told them that he had been inside the snake at the time. "Is Mom here?" said Fred, turning to Cyrus. "She probably doesn't even know what's happening yet," said Cyrus. "The important thing was to get you away before Umbridge could interfere. I expect Dumbledore's letting Molly know how now." "We have got to go to St. Mungo's," said Ginny urgently. She looked around at her brothers. this expression. He's our dad. And how are you going to explain how you know Arthur was attacked before the hospital even let his wife know? What does the matter? Said George Woolley. It matters because we don't want to draw attention to the fact that Harry is having vision of things that are happening hundreds of miles away, said Cyrus angrily. Have you any idea what the ministry would make of that information? Fred and George looked as though they could not care less what the ministry made of anything. Ron was still white faced and silent. Ginny said, somebody else could have told us. We could have heard it somewhere other than Harry. Like who? Said Cyrus impatiently. Listen, your dad's been hurt while on duty for the order, and the circumstances are fishy enough without his children knowing about it seconds after it happened. You could seriously damage the orders. We don't care about the dumb order, shouted Fred. It's our dad dying we are talking about, yelled George. Your father knew what he was getting into, and he won't thank you for messing things up for the order, said Cyrus angrily in his turn. This is how it is. This is why you are not in the order. You don't understand. There are things worth dying for. Easy for you to say, stuck here, glowed Fred. I don't see you risking your neck. The little color remaining in Cyrus' face drained from it. He looked for a moment as though he would quite like to his Fred, but when he spoke, it was in a voice of determined calm. I know it's hard, but we have all got to act as though we don't know anything yet. We have got to stay put, at least until we heard from your mother, alright? Fred and George still looked mutinous. Guinea, however, took a few steps over to the nearest chair and sank into it. Harry looked at Ron, who made a funny movement somewhere between the nod and shrug, and they sat down too. The twins glared at Cyrus for another minute, then took seat on either side of Ginny. That's right, said Cyrus encouragingly. Come on, let's all have a drink while we are waiting. Assure Butterbeer. He raised his wand as he spoke, and half a dozen bottles came flying toward them out of the pantry, skidding along the table, scattering the debris of Cyrus' meal, and stopped neatly in front of the six of them. They all drank, and for a while the other sounds were those of cracking of kitchen fire and soft thud of their bottle on the table. Harry was only drinking to have something to do with his hand. His stomach was full of horrible, hot, bubbling guilt. They could not be here if it were not for him. They would all still be asleep, dead, and it was no good telling himself that by raising the alarm he had ensured that Mr. Weasley was found, because there was also the inescapable business of it being he who had attacked Mr. Weasley in the first place. Don't be stupid, you haven't got time, he told himself, trying to keep calm. Another, though the hand on his butterbeer bottle was shaking. You were lying in bed. You weren't attacking anymore. But then, what just happened in Dumbledore's office? He asked himself. I felt like I wanted to attack Dumbledore too. He put the bottle down on the table a little harder than he meant to, so that it sloped over onto the table. No one took any notice. Then a burst of fire in mid-air illuminated the dirty plate in front of them, and as they gave cries of shock, a scroll of parchment fell with a thud onto the table, accompanied by a single golden phoenix tail feather. Fox, said Cyrus at once, snatching up at the parchment. That's not Dumbledore's writing. It must be a message from your mother. Here, he thrust the letter into George's hand, who ripped it open and read aloud. Dad is still alive. I'm setting out for St. Mangus now. Stay where you are. I will send news as soon as I can, Mum. George looked around the table. Still alive, he said slowly. But that make it sound. He did not need to finish the sentence. It sounded to Harry too as though Mr. Weasley was hovering somewhere between life and death. Still exceptionally pale, Ron stared at the back of his mother's letter as though it might speak word of comfort to him. Fred pulled the parchment out of George's hands and read it for himself, then looked up at Harry, who felt his hand shaking on his butterbeer bottle again and clenched it more tightly to stop the trembling. If Harry had ever said through a longer night than this one, he could not remember it. Cyrus suggested once that they all go to bed, but without any real conviction, and the Weasley look of disgust were answered enough. They mostly sat in silence around the table, watching the candle wick sinking lower and lower into liquid wax. Now and when rising bottle to their lips, speaking only to check the time to wonder aloud what was happening and to reassure one another that if there was bad news, they would know straight away, for Mrs. Weasley's must long silence have arrived at St. Mango's. Fred fell into a doze, his head sagging sideways onto his shoulder. Ginny was curled like that on her chair, but her eyes were open. Harry could see them reflecting the firelight. Ron was sitting with his head in his hands, whether awake or asleep. It was impossible to tell, and he and Cyrus looked at each other every so often, intruded upon the family, drifting, waiting. And then at 5 in the morning, by Ron's watch, the kitchen door swung open and Mrs. Weasley entered the kitchen. She was extremely pale, but when they all turned to look at her, Fred, Ron, and Harry, half rising from the chair, she gave a broad smile. "He's going to be all right," he said, a voice picked with tiredness. "He's sleeping. We can all go to see him later. We're sitting with him now. He's going to take the morning off work." Fred fell back into his chair and his hands over his face. George and Ginny got up, walked swiftly over to their mother and hugged her. Ron gave a very shaky laugh and downed the rest of his butterbeer in one. "Breakfast?" said Cyrus loudly and joyfully, jumping to his feet. "Where is that accused house elf creature?" Creature. But Creature did not answer. "Summon. Oh, forgot it," then muttered Cyrus, counting the people in front of him. "So, it's breakfast for, let's see, 7 bacon and egg, I think, and some tea and toast." Harry hurried over to the stove to help. He did not want to intrude upon the Weasleys' happiness, and he dreaded the moment when Mrs. Weasley would ask him to recount his vision. However, he had barely taken plate from the dresser when Mrs. Weasley lifted them out of his hand and pulled him into her. "I don't know what would have happened if it hadn't been for you, Harry," she said in a muffled voice. "They might not have been found Arthur for hours, and then it would have been too late, but thanks to you, he's alive, and Dumbledore's been able to think up a good cover story for Arthur's being where he was. You have no idea what trouble he would have been in otherwise. Look at poor Sturgis." Harry could hardly stand her gratitude, but fortunately she soon released him to turn to Cyrus and thank him for looking after her children through the night. Cyrus said that he was very pleased to have been able to help and hoped they would all stay with him as long as Mr. Weasley was in hospital. "Oh, Cyrus, I'm so grateful. They think he'll be there a little while and it will be wonderful to be nearer. Of course, that might mean we are here for Christmas." more the merrier, said Cyrus with such obvious sincerity that Mrs. Weasley beamed at him, threw on an apron, and began to help with breakfast. Cyrus, Harry muttered, unable to stand it a moment longer. Can I have a quick word? Now. He walked into the dark pantry and Cyrus followed without preamble. Harry told his godfather every detail of his vision and had including the fact that he himself had been the snake who had attacked Mr. Weasley. When he paused for breath, Cyrus said, "Did you tell Dumbledore this?" "Yes," said Harry impatiently, "but he didn't tell me what it meant." "Well, he doesn't tell me anything anymore. I'm sure he would have told you if it wasn't anything to wrong about," said Cyrus steadily. "But that's not all," said Harry in the voice only a little above whisper. "Cyrus, I think I'm going mad." Back in Dumbledore's office, just before we took the portkey, for a couple of seconds, there I thought I was a snake. I felt like one. My scar really hurt when I was looking at Dumbledore. Cyrus, I wanted to attack him. He could only see a silver of Cyrus' face. The rest was in darkness. It must have been the aftermath of vision, that's all, said Cyrus. You were still thinking of dream or whatever it was. It wasn't that, said Harry, shaking his head. It was like something rose up inside me, like there is snake inside me. You need to sleep, said Cyrus firmly. You are going to have breakfast and then go upstairs to bed. And then you can go and see Arthur after lunch with the others. You are in shock, Harry. You are blaming yourself for something you are only witnessed. And it's lucky you did witness it, or Arthur might have died. Just stop worrying. He clapped Harry on his shoulder and left the pantry, leaving Harry standing alone in the dark. Everyone but Harry spent the rest of the morning sleeping. He went up to the bedroom he had shared with Ron over the summer, but while Ron crawled into bed and was asleep within a minute, Harry sat fully clothed, hunched against the cold metal bar of the bedstead, keeping himself deliberately uncomfortable, determined not to fall into doors, terrified that he might become a serpent again in his sleep and awake to find that he had attacked Ron or else slithered through the house after one of the others. When Ron woke up, Harry pretended to have enjoyed a refreshing nap too. Their trunks arrived from Hogwarts while they were eating lunch, so that they could race as Muggle for the trip to St. Mungo's. Everybody except Harry was righteously happy and talkative as they changed out of their robes into jeans and sweatshirts, and they greeted Tonk and Mad Eye, who had thought of to escort them across London, gleefully laughing at the bowler that I was wearing at an angle to conceal his magical eye and assured him truthfully that Tonks, whose hair was short and bright pink again, would attack far less attention to the underground. Tonk was very interested in Harry's vision of attack on Mr. something he was not remotely interested in discussing. There isn't any sheer blood in your family, is there? She inquired curiously as they sat side and side on the train rattling toward the heart of the city. No, said Harry, thinking of Professor Tailway and feeling insulted. No, said Tonk musingly. No, I suppose it's not really prophecy you're doing, is it? I mean, you are not seeing the future, you are seeing the present. It's odd, isn't it? Useful though. Harry did not answer. Fortunately, they got out of the next stop, a station in the very heart of London, and in the bustle of leaving the train, he was able to allow Fred and George to get between himself and Tom who was leading the way. They all followed her up the escalator. Moody clunking along with the back of the group, his bowler tilted low and one grinnell hand stuck in between the bottom of his coat. Plucking his wand, Harry thought he seemed to conceal eyes staring at heard him, trying to deflect more question about his dream. He had asked Paddy where St. Mungo's was hidden. Not far from here, grunted Moody as they stepped out into the wintry air on the broad store-lined street packed with Christmas shopper. He pushed Harry a little ahead of him and stepped along just behind. Harry knew the eye was moving in their direction under the tall hat. It wasn't easy to find a good location for a hospital. Nowhere in Diagon Alley was big enough and we couldn't have it underground like the ministry. Health in the end of the managed to get hold of a building up there. There was sick wizard who'd came and go and just blend it within the crowd. He seized Harry's shoulder and prevent them being separated by the gaggles of shopper plainly intent and nothing but making it onto the nearby shop full of electrical gadget. Here we go, said Moody as a moment later he had arrived outside a large, old-fashioned red brick department store called Purge and Dow's Limited. Place had a shabby, miserable air. The window display consists of a few dischieved dummies with their wing askew, standing at random and modeling fashion at least 10 years out of the dead. Guards signed on all the dusky doors lead closed for refreshment. Harry distinctly heard a large woman laden with a plastic shopping bag say to her friend as they passed, "It never opened that place." Right, said Tom, beckoning them forward to the window displaying nothing but particularly ugly female dummy who falls elsewhere were hanging off, who was modeling a green nylon pinafore dress. Everybody ready? Then nodded, clustering around her. Moody gave Harry another shove between the shoulder blade to urge him forward, and Tom leaned closer to the glass, looking up at the very ugly dummy, and said, her breath steamed up the glass watcher. "We are here to see Arthur Weasley." For a split second, Harry thought how absurd it was for Tom to expect the dummy to hear her talking that quickly through a sheet of glass when there was buses rambling along behind her and all the racket of street dull of shopkeeper. Then he reminded himself that dummies could not hear anyway. Next second his mouth opened in shock that the dummy gave a tiny nod back on its jaunt finger, and Tom seized Ginny and Mrs. Weasley by the elbow, stepped right through the glass and vanished. Fred and George and Ron stepped after them, had a glance around at the jostling crowd. Not one of them seemed have glance to spare. Our window display as ugly as Purse and Downs Limited, nor did any of them seem to have noticed that six people had just melted into thin air in front of them. "Come on," growled Moody, giving Harry yet another spoke of back, and together they stepped forward through what felt like the sheet of cool water emerging quite warm and dry on the other side. There was no sign of ugly dummy or a space where she was stood. They had arrived in what seemed to be a crowded reception area where a row of witches and wizards sat upon risky wooden chairs, some looking perfectly normal and pursuing out of date copies of Wish Weekly, other sporting gruesome disfigurement and such as elephant trunk or extra handing sticking out of their chest. The room was scarcely less quiet than the street outside, for many of the patients were making very particular noise. A sweety face witch in the center of the front row, who was fanning herself vigorously with a copy of Daily Prophet, kept letting off a high-pitched whistle as steam came pouring out of her mouth, and a grubbly-looking warlock in the corner changed like bell every time he moved, and with each chant his head vibrated horribly, so that he had to seize himself by the ear and hold it steadily. Witches and wizards in lime green robe were walking up and down the rows, asking questions and making notes on clipboard like Amrish. Harry noticed the emblem embroidered on their chest, a wand had a long bone cross. Are they doctors? He asked Ron quickly. Doctors, said Ron, looking startled. Those muggles nuttered that cup people up. Nah, they are healers. Oh, here, called Mrs. Weasley over renewed clenching on the warlock in the corner, and they followed her to queue in front of the plump blonde witch seated at a desk marked inquiries. The wall behind her was covered in notice and posters saying things like a clean cauldron, keep potion from becoming poison, and antidotes are antidotes unless approved by a Koffel healer. There was also a large portrait of a witch with long silver ringlet that was labeled Billy's Derwent, St. Mungo's Healer, 1722-1794. 41. Headmistress of Hogwarts Schooling of Witchcraft and Wizardry, 1741 to 1768. Elise was eyeing the Weasley party as though counting them. When Harry caught her eye, she gave a tiny wink, walked sideways out of the portrait, and vanished. Meanwhile, at the front of the check, a young wizard was performing an odd one-the-spot jig and trying to between yelps the piano. We explained his predicament to the witch behind his desk. It's this, ouch, show my brother gave me. Oh, they are eating my ouch. Pete, look at them. There must be some kind jinx on them and I can't get them off. He hopped from the one foot to the another as though dancing on hot coal. The shoes didn't prevent to reading. Today, said the blonde, which irritably pointing at large sign of the left of her desk. You want spell damage? Fourth floor, just like it was on the floor guide next. The wizard hobbled and pranced sideways out of the way. The Weasley party moved forward the few steps, and Harry read floor guide. You are a very old, stooped wizard with a hearing trumpet and snuffle to front of queue now. I'm here to see Broderick Board. He is what 49. I am afraid you are wasting your time, said the witch dismissively. He's completely adly, you know, still thinking he's a teapot. Next, a harassed looking wizard was holding his small daughter tightly on the ankle while she flapped around his head using immensely large feathery wing that had sprouted right out of back of her emperor's suit. Fourth floor, said the witch in bored voice, without asking, and the man disappeared through the double door behind the desk, holding his daughter like an oddly shaped balloon. Next, Mrs. Weasley moved forward to the desk. Hello, she said. My husband, Arthur Weasley, was supposed to be moved to different ward this morning. Could you tell us, Arthur Weasley? Said the witch, running her finger down a long list in front of her. Yes, first floor, second door on the right. Delhi, Lanway Ward. Thank you, said Mrs. Weasley. Come on, you lot. They followed through the double door and along the narrow corridor beyond, which was lit with more portraits of famous healers and lit by crystal bubble full of candles that floated up on the ceiling looking like a giant soap. More witches and wizards in lime green robe walked in out of the door they passed. A force-filling yellow gas walked into passageway and they passed the door and every now and then they heard climbed a flight of stairs and entered the creature induced injury corridor, where its second door of the right bore word dangerous dark Lillian ward. Cyrus bites. Underneath his was a card of a brass holder on which he had been handwriting. Healer in charge, Hippocrates, Smax, Trini, Healer, Augustus Spy. Well, wait outside, Molly, Tonks said. Arthur won't want too many visitors at once. It out to be just the family first. Mad Eye growled his approval of this idea and set himself with his back again. The corridor was his magical eyes spinning in all directions. Harry drew back too, but Mrs. Weasley reached out a hand and pushed him through the door, saying, "Don't be silly, Harry. Arthur wants to thank you." The ward was small and rather dingy as the only window was narrow and set high in the wall facing the door. Most of the light came from more shining crystal bubble clustering in the middle of the ceiling. The wall were of panelled oak, and there was a portrait of rather vicious looking wizard on the wall. Caption Unquars Raccaro, 1612 to 1697, inventor of the Arnett explaining verse. There were only three patients. Mr. Weasley was occupying the bed at the far end of the ward beside the tiny window. Harry was pleased to relieved to see that he was propped up several pillows and reading the Daily Prophet by the solitary ray of sunlight falling onto his bed. He looked around as they walked toward him and seeing whom it was beamed. "Hello," he called, throwing the prophet aside. "You just left, Molly." "Had to get back to work, but he said he'll drop in on you later." "How are you, Arthur?" asked Mrs. Weasley, bending down to kiss his cheek and looking anxiously onto his face. "You are still looking a bit peaky." "I feel absolutely fine," said Mr. Weasley brightly, holding out his good arm to give Ginny a hug. "If you could only take a bandage off, I'd be fit to go home." "Why can't they take them off, Dad?" asked Fred. "Well, I start bleeding like mad every time they try," said Mr. Weasley cheerfully, reaching across for his wand, which lay on his beside cabinet, and waved it to six extra chairs appear at his beside and sit them all. It seemed there was more rather usual kind of poison in the snake fangs that keep mouth open. They are sure they'll find an antidote, though they say they have had much worse case than mine, and in meantime I just have to keep taking a blood replenishing potion every hour. But that fellow over there, he said, dropping his voice and nodding toward the bed opposite, in which a man lay, looking green and stickly, and stared at the ceiling, bitten by werewolf. Poor chap, no cure at all. "A werewolf?" whispered Mrs. Weasley, looking alarmed. "Is he safe in the public ward? Shouldn't he be in the private room? It's 2 weeks till full moon." Mr. Weasley reminded her quickly. "They have been talking to him this morning. The healers, trying to persuade him he'll be able to lead an almost normal life. I said to him, I didn't mention name of course, but I said I knew a werewolf personally, very nice man who find a condition quite easy to manage." "What did he say?" asked George. "Said he had give me another bite if I didn't shut up," said Mr. Weasley sadly. "And that woman, oh here," he indicated the other that occupied bed, which was right beside the door, wouldn't tell the healers but beat her, which make us all think it must have been something she was handling illegally. Whatever it was, took a real chunk of what her leg, very nasty smell when they take off the dressing. So you're going to tell us what happened, Dad? Said Fred, pulling his chair closer to bed. Well, you already know, don't you? Said Mr. Weasley with a significant smile at Harry. It's very simple. I had a very long day, dozed off, got sneaked up on and bitten. Is it in a profit you being attacked? Asked Harry. Fred indicate the newspaper Mr. Weasley had cast aside. No, of course not, said Mr. Weasley with a slightly bitter smile. The ministry wouldn't want everyone to know a dirty great serpent got Arthur, said Mrs. Weasley warning. What me? Mr. Weasley said hastily, though Harry was quite sure that was not what he had meant to say. So were you when it happened, Dad? Said George. That's my business, said Mr. Weasley, though with a small smile. He snatched up Daily Prophet, shook it open again, and said, I was just reading about Wilshire arrest when you arrived. You know, Willie turned out to be behind the regurgitating toilets last summer. One of his jinx backfired, then toilet exploded, and then found him lying unconscious in the wrecked cover from head to foot in. Did you say you were on duty? Fred interrupted in low voice. What were you doing? You heard your father, whispered Mrs. Weasley. We are not discussing this here. Go on about Wildershire Arthur. Well, don't ask me how, but he actually got off on the toilet charge